So his son I was very close with was my cousin, Frankie Red. He was my cousin through marriage. We all had thought the movie was about him.
Okay, well, maybe it was.
No, actually, every neighborhood, I realize now, right? The movie was made about somebody. I remember looking into it. It was an actual person they were thinking of when making that movie. But every neighborhood that had like a known thief in the neighborhood, like a good thief, thought it was about them.
I see.
Our neighborhood, we had thought it was about Jimmy Red. Charlestown. You ever heard of Charlestown in Boston?
Yes. Yes, I've been there.
You've been there? Yeah. Today it's like all yuppies and, really gentrified, But back in the day, per capita, the most bank robbers ever, in the world, in this small neighborhood. So I remember going up to Boston because as I hang out there a lot, they always thought it was about them or a guy that they knew. So every neighborhood thought it was about somebody, but I know it was about somebody. And I would think that person probably was from Chicago or something, had to be.
But, psychologically, that's interesting because it shows the power of film. And it's a very intense movie. Again, it's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a very intense movie. But that other people identify with the person that they're seeing on the screen. And, that's the power of film, is the ability to make the audience identify with what they call the hero or the key person in the film. Aristotle said you have to have two things to have a great film. Number one, you have to give up reality. You have to say, I'm going to accept whatever's on the screen as real. I'm going to accept that. I'm not going to say it's a movie and it's been made.
No matter what it is.
Doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to accept that reality. And number two, without realizing it, psychologically, you begin to identify with the hero on the screen or the main character on the screen, and you take the emotional journey with them. Whatever they go through in the movie, you're going through those emotions with them. It's called catharsis. They talk about catharsis in therapy. So you have to have the giving up of suspension of belief and catharsis. So I can see why many people who are thieves would look at that movie and go through catharsis. They feel like, wow, I can relate. That's me.
Exactly. Or what about the guy who doesn't think it's him, but people think it is him? Mm-hmm. That's a form of it too, right? Mm-hmm. Like us from the neighborhood. I don't think Jimmy thought the movie was about him, or if he thought it was about him, he didn't tell anybody because they would make like he's bragging, right? Mm-hmm. But the people that thought it was about him, that's another form of it, right?
Yes, yeah.
Well, it's like that movie Scarface. I'll say it time and time and again. When that movie Scarface came out with Tony Montana, what's his name played, Al Pacino. You know how many guys went to jail over that movie because they tried to emulate that Tony Montana?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 80s.
That was a rough character.
Right. So what do you call that? Like when you see a movie, like a lot of kids that were dealing drugs back in the street, okay? They went to go watch that movie, and all of a sudden they think they were a kingpin, and then they want to do things like they seen in the movie. Mm-hmm. And then before you know it, they get hit with a kingpin charge. They're facing 20 plus years life in jail. And they don't even realize it wasn't them that was, it was them that was doing it. But they were just trying to copy, to be somebody in the movie.
Well, in literature, they call that the anti-hero. And actually, the great anti-hero, the first of the great anti-heroes was James Bond. License to Kill. It's great. Here's a guy who's kills people, but man, I want to be like him. Who doesn't want to be James Bond? So, right? And what does James Bond do? He kills people. So that's...
And gets away with it.
And he gets away with it. So the idea of the anti-hero, The Sopranos is a great example. Tony Soprano. This guy is so terrible and awful and nasty, and the things he does, you can't help loving Tony Soprano. He's lovable, but at the same time, He does horrible things. So people see something like Scarface, horrible person. But boy, wouldn't I like to be like him? Wouldn't I like to be this guy that gets away with everything? And
The
so
villain.
it's the anti-hero.
It's the anti-hero.
He's a hero, but he's the anti-hero.
Well, now what happens to the guy who tries to be like Tony Soprano? He goes out and thinks he's going to get away with everything that Tony Soprano does, but then real life is, no, wait a second. You're breaking the law, you're committing crimes, now you're facing life. Now what happens? Does he wake up from that anti-hero, or he still thinks...
Well, it all depends. He could still think that he's playing out the role of the anti-hero, that he's, somehow playing out that role. Our personality, particularly if we feel like we are insignificant in life, and so we don't have a personality, so to speak, because we feel insignificant, we take on a personality. We take on the personality of that person we see on the screen. And I'm going to be that person. And I'm just like that person. And whatever happens to me, well, okay, it happened to him, so it's happening to me.
So he or she gave himself an identity from the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's how powerful, you're talking about how powerful movies are.
Yes.
Wow. That is so interesting to me, because you meet people like that. They think they're playing a lot of guys today in the street, even back when I was around, they thought it was a game, when the Godfather movies came out, Godfather 1, Godfather 2, and I think a lot of guys made mistakes based off those movies. They glorified it on the screen, and they got guys trying to act out the same parts on the street, and then all of a sudden they get something bad happens, not like the movie, the movie, the actors, something bad happens, they wake up and they're still all who they are, right? It's all fiction. A lot of those guys, they thought, till today, the way the movies glorify the Mafia and the mob and not really knowing what it's really about, it still goes on today. I'm sure these kids out there, or whoever it is, they'll watch these movies and, like you said, they don't have an identity. They got no personality. They got nothing going for them. And they think they're this character. And then when something happens, they wake up. Or maybe they never wake up, right?
Maybe they never wake up.
I took some notes, some cliff notes, that I want to ask you some questions about psychology, more on the criminal side, because it always intrigued me to know about these things and to see your take on it. One question I have for you is the difference between mental health, the true definition of insanity, and the legal side of it. Can you break it down for me, like in layman terms?
Yeah. Well, so there's a difference. So let's say you're going to put up the insanity defense. You're going to say, I killed a person, but I was insane when I did it.
Let's take like what scenario? Is this person on trial? Is this person charged with anything, or just normal life?
Well, I'm going to start out with, let's say they're on trial and they're putting up the defense. At the time that I did this, I was insane.
Oh, they're claiming insanity.
They're claiming insanity. But there's a difference in insanity in the way that a psychiatrist or psychologist would look at it versus the way the legal system looks at it. As a psychologist, it's now closed, but I worked at the Arizona State Hospital when they had psychiatric hospitals for those who are insane. And they would be locked up in a hospital. The doors were locked, and you go into a ward, and the ward is locked because everybody there is completely out of their minds. They're insane.
I got a question.
Yes.
Is it like the movies?
Yeah. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a very good portrayal.
Really?
So you go there and you say, okay, this person has schizophrenia. This person is bipolar. This person is paranoid schizophrenic. This person is disorganized schizophrenic. And so you define those as mental illnesses. The court doesn't look at it that way. Yes, there's exactly.
The court looks at it.
The court looks at it, and the court says you have to do two things in order to plead that you were insane at the time that you committed the crime. Either you were driven by an impulse that you could not control, irresistible impulse.
Okay, so just to give you a scenario, a guy is so mad at somebody, as soon as he sees them, he just kills them. That's what you're talking about.
That would be let's say irresistible impulse. Yeah, that's one. In other words, you just lose your head
Lose your
at
mind,
that
yeah,
moment
yeah.
and you do something. The second one is he did not know the difference between right or wrong at the time of the crime. So they were unable to distinguish moral behavior, what you can and can't do.
Because they don't know if he was in his right
They
state of
don't
mind.
know if it's right or wrong. Exactly. Those are the only two. So if you, for example, have a person who's a paranoid personality disorder and they think everyone's against them and they go and shoot their neighbor because they think their neighbor's spying on them, the question is, at the time that they shot their neighbor, even though they were suffering under a delusion, did they know the difference between right or wrong? Did they know that you're not supposed to kill people? Well, if they knew they weren't supposed to kill people and they killed someone, then they're responsible for the crime, even if they're paranoid. Just to give you an insight into how that works.
Okay, so let's compare that to, I'm trying to like when I was growing up, okay? A lot of the guys that I've seen and I've been around and stuff. So I talked about this with Carmine last time I was on. What always till today that I get confused about, not confused, but I'm intrigued by it, is you'll get a guy who's a known gangster on the street, okay? Come home, be a father figure, be an uncle, a brother, sit down to Sunday dinner, kiss the baby, acting very normal and family. Then go on the street and kill somebody. And then go to church after that and go back to being a family member. Make sense? What do you call that? A person that could turn it on and off like that. So in other words, act normally and be a family guy, but then go out on the street and, you call it just business, right? Go out and commit a crime, violent, and then come home like nothing happened and go back to normal. And then, go to church and sit down and eat with the family and kiss the babies and all that stuff.
Well, that's called a sociopathic personality.
A sociopathic personality.
Yeah.
So explain that.
Well, what that means is that's a person who feels that the laws don't apply to them, that basically they can do whatever they want because moral conduct doesn't apply to me. What's right, what's wrong, what is right and wrong? I mean, it makes no sense.
Who's to say?
Therefore, doing what I do is not in any way wrong. Most people are inhibited, right? They would say, gee, I can't, my neighbor stepped on my roses but I can't kill the guy for that, But a sociopathic personality goes, that SOB stepped on my roses, I'll show him, and would have no thoughts about, I'm taking you have heavier examples. I'm taking silly examples to draw. So a sociopathic people have no moral compunction. They have no conscience in the way that we ordinarily think of conscience. Something bothers my conscience because I feel I stepped over a line. They have no sense of having stepped over a line. I didn't step over any lines.
Now, when a person like that, let's say you're related to a person like that, and they tell you, I love you. And they really do. They would do nothing to hurt you. Doesn't matter what they did on the street. Doesn't matter what they do for a living. They would never do it to you. But they tell you, I love you. Is there such thing as sociopath having?
Yes. Yeah. They mean I love you. So that's can be fine.
But are they saying they love you like they love Chinese food, or do they really mean it?
That's a good question. I do think they mean it. But it's because it's part of their narcissism. If it's someone they love and it's part of who they are, then they love that person because it's part of who I am and my identity and my personhood, which is sacrosanct. So yes, I can love others.
Okay, so now let's deep dive more into it. Let's say, you have, like you said, you have a relative. The guy is a known gangster on the street. He takes care of business, mob business. And with that, there's a lot of violence and stuff like that, right? But then comes home and would never do that to anybody in his family, protects his family. He thinks he's really protecting his family, right? But also he's putting them in danger at the same time.
Well, okay, so he's when you looking at it from again psychology, okay? When you say protecting his family, he's protecting his property. It's like that. These are my things,
right?
And my things I protect.
It doesn't matter about anybody else's property. He's just all concerned about his.
No one's else. No, it's like the king in the castle.
So don't do what I do. Do what I say.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes a lot of that answers my question. Here's another thing I wrote down was, what's the irresistible impulses versus the difference between right and wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question because you gave an example that was a little bit challenging to me because in a fit of passion is one thing. Like if you're just a regular person and you get into an argument in a bar and the argument gets heated up, and then by the time you know it's someone, yes, thank you, someone pulls a gun or, something like that happens. Thank you. That certainly is in the heat of passion, but there could be a lot of courtroom arguments about that because you could say, well, did you let yourself get to the point of heat of passion when you should have backed off? Putting that aside, if you talk about bipolar disorder, for example, what is bipolar disorder? Bipolar disorder is where you have uncontrollable mood swings. In other words, you become profoundly depressed, or for no reason at all, you then become profoundly manic, which means you are excitable, you have to walk around, you have to do things. Now, could that be an irresistible impulse? It might be. It might be an irresistible impulse if you have a bipolar disorder and you're in a manic phase.
But the difference between right and wrong, who's to say what's right and wrong?
Well, that's exactly what a sociopath says, is who's to say what's right and wrong.
Well,
in other words,
maybe I was raised by sociopaths.
When society says this is right and this is wrong, most people will say, oh my God, I can't cross that line because, God says the 10 Commandments,
right,
or
who is God?
The law is, but when you say, hey, who is to say what's right and wrong, then that's,
okay, so I gave so I said it at the right time, right? I guess my next question is, what I was thinking about was the difference between insane, not insane, and malingering.
That's another element of those. Those are three. And when I did evaluations, I've been in all the jails here in town.
You have?
Oh yeah, every jail.
The most recent jail I've been to out here, because I just got home not long ago, was Florence in the Core Civic. There's a federal holdover, but it's a county jail, but there's federal holdover, for the detainees pretrial. I was there for about 2.5 years, walking around in Crocs and jumpsuits and all that stuff. So you were in that jail?
I was in the jails here in town. I was in Florence, I think only once. But when I say the jails, I'm talking about Durango or
Madison Street.
The
Matrix. You've been to the Matrix?
Those places all the time, yeah.
I was in the Matrix for 2 days.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I used to interview right in the jail there, meet with the prisoner right into jail. Sometimes it would be a room such as this, where it would be a table and myself and the prisoner, or sometimes there would be a glass window, depended which
Behind
jail
the
it
glass.
was. But yeah, so I've interviewed and all. So the question that the court wants to know from me is this person really insane at the time? Do they have a mental illness?
Is he fit to stand trial?
Is he fit to stand trial? Exactly.
Now, if you say he's not fit to stand trial, they can still bring him to trial.
Well, what they try to do is they try to provide treatment to make him fit to stand trial. And that can be a process of however long it would take. And when there was a hospital, they would transfer them to the Arizona State Hospital, and they would do the treatment there. I worked on the forensic unit of the Arizona State Hospital for many years.
Okay, so see what you're saying is exactly right. On the federal side, there was a kid in there. He was claiming insanity. He was going around, you could probably Google him. He was a riot, this kid. He would go and verbally harass any politician or court. He was always down at the Phoenix courthouse screaming at prosecutors, just really bad harassing people on the street. Got to the point where they wound up arresting him. He claimed insanity. They said, okay, we're going to see if you're really crazy. They sent him to Butler, North Carolina for an evaluation. And it's not a pleasant trip because you got to go through all the buses and the diesel therapy, like they call it, And they keep you there. They put you in front of guys like yourself, and they determine if you're fit to stand trial. But the process could take months. And I seen what he was trying to do. He was just trying to delay the trial, figuring, okay, the longer it goes, the more likely they're going to cut a deal. But he didn't even want a deal. He really thought that, I shouldn't be here and I shouldn't do a day. And I told him, I said, look, you've been here now. You've been walking around here now for a year. You're going to play this insanity card. We all knew he wasn't crazy. He knew exactly what he was doing. He figured, okay, well, I could postpone the trial another year. Well, now you got 2 years in. You don't want to do a day. Why don't you ask for a speedy trial and go to trial? Make sense?
Well, but that's called malingering. In other words, pretending now you're supposed to tell the court when the psychologist does the evaluation. That's one of the things that you need to tell the court. If you feel that this person is pretending in order to escape going to trial. And there were times when I would report to the court, this person is malingering. They're not really mentally ill. They're just doing this because they don't want to go to trial. And sometimes in Arizona, people felt, hey, I would rather be at the state hospital than in jail. At the state hospital, I walk around, the meals are better, your treatment is better. So if I say I can't stand trial, they send me to the hospital. I'll take the hospital over jail.
So they know exactly what they know what they're doing. So that's malingering. Interesting.